Hello and welcome to another episode of the Chess Cybersecurity video series. This time we're going to be talking about logging and monitoring, and joining me here today I've got Matt from Logpoint and Costa from Sophos. Would you guys like to just introduce yourselves?
Yeah, hi everyone, my name's Costa. I work for Sophos as a cybersecurity consultant. I've been at Sophos now for about 4.5 years, and I predominantly work in our public sector and enterprise space, advising our customers on how to help meet the goals of their cybersecurity strategies.
Hi everyone, I'm Matt from Logpoint. I'm a regional sales director within Logpoint, and I've been in cybersecurity now for just under 15 years, working in multiple organizations from startups to market leaders in different areas of the network, whether it be endpoint, cloud, network, and now security operations.
I'm sure I need no introduction. Adam Gleason, I'm a cybersecurity vendor alliance manager here at Chess. Okay, gents, so you both come from very different cybersecurity vendors, but there's a lot of similarity between the products that you do as well. So what I'd like to start off doing is really just talking about why we need logging and monitoring, and I think this is predominantly around that there's a need for a lot of additional visibility into what is going on in our environments these days, because it's not just one threat that we face, it's a lot. If we could maybe start with you, Costa.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we only need to rewind the clock 5-10 years, and environments, infrastructures were very, very different to what they look like now, right? Everything was very self-contained. There was the traditional perimeters, your firewalls to allow egress and ingress. But actually now, when you explode a view of a simple network topology, you've got things in the cloud, you've got identity providers, you've got services that you subscribe to that are SaaS-based. You know, the perimeter is no longer the same as what it used to be.
And of course, the users have now been scattered to the wind as well.
And that's the probably biggest part of all of this. They're no longer sat behind your perimeter in your castle, as it were. They are literally wherever in the world they need to be. And so, yeah, visibility is more crucial than I think it has ever been from a security perspective.
And as you alluded to there, the interfaces between all these different platforms are increasingly complex, and that's where the likes of stuff that you guys work with comes in, isn't it?
Yeah, we're in an industry where point solutions have been created over many years to solve specific problems, and obviously what that creates is these point solutions solve their specific problem is a complexity when you're talking around orchestrating across all of those capabilities, and that's not going away, and it's actually getting harder now because we've gone from probably what was a prevention first strategy some years ago to now I think it's very obvious that prevention only does not work, and you need detection and response capabilities. So what that means now is detection capabilities are creating so much data, and it's not always, most of it's great data, but it's not always good data because some of that's false positives as well. So being able to successfully manage and input this data that's not necessarily true threat data, how you prioritize that and how you manage that is a real key challenge, but something that everyone needs to do.
Cool. And of course, the cost to businesses from cyber attacks is continually increasing, as is the likelihood that they're going to suffer it. And I read in one of the Sophos reports that the average cost of a data breach for a business is expected to reach $4.2 million in 2023. Now, I think we're probably talking about, we're considering very large businesses in that, but even on a smaller scale, it's devastating to a small business if they, or it can be, if they suffer data breaches and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes we get carried away with how much it costs to pay the ransom, as it were.
Yeah.
But there is all the associated downtime when a business can't operate, it can't transact, the recovery time period, the investments that maybe take place, even things like the governance behind it, having to report it, that you've had a cyber breach, or maybe even having to go back and plead for, a bit of assistance from cyber insurance or anything like that. All of that investment that has gone into it ultimately continues to build and build and build when they've had a breach. And actually that, I believe there's a stat now that says across the world, it will cost over $10 trillion over the time period of this year, based on not just ransoms, but any sort of data breach, exfiltration. And that, of course, again, includes all the steps right the way through to recovery.
So cyber attacks can be prevented, can't they? And
they can, and we hope that more and more happen in terms of preventing those cyber attacks in the coming years. But equally, on the flip side of that, if an organisation wants to get in, they will get in if they've got the resource and the money. So I think when people, and it's not scaremongering, but it's very important for organisations to truly sit down and understand what their risk profile is.
Yeah.
If somebody does get in because they are that motivated to get in, what do I need to protect? What parts of the network do I need to detect malicious behaviour or anomalous behaviour in order to give me early warning signs, so that even if they're in, it doesn't necessarily mean a cyber attack has to happen, because I can prevent them from getting the information or
And
the
that's,
data.
and I think that's what I was sort of driving at there, was with the early warning signs that you alluded to. There are always early warning signs, but you're very much searching for a needle in a haystack if you're just doing it from just standing there looking at everything that's going on. And that's where the sort of solutions that we're going to talk about today are going to come in useful. And as well with logging and monitoring, it can also be quite useful from a forensic perspective as well. So after the event, sometimes once you've got everything under control, it's not always clear what actually happened, where the threat came from and stuff like that. So having a record of all of this sort of logging and monitoring is really good.
And I think that comes down to not necessarily a cybersecurity use case, but use case nonetheless when it comes to compliance frameworks and things like that. Having that data that goes back 12 months, 24 months, 36 months, depending on what's needed, is very, very important for businesses to store and be able to access at the right period of time, should that be needed for whatever reason.
Of course, and I think that's a pretty good point as well, that I was sort of talking to sort of very in the immediate of aftermath of something, but if you've been hacked or something and you didn't know about it at the time, then exactly that historic record, you can actually go back and maybe see the warning signs there.
It's an interesting point to develop, though. When you think about dwell time of an active adversary in a network, they can range anywhere from a few days to multiple months and even longer, depending on what they're doing in the network. We've seen it time and time again. You talked about there being plenty of signals that something's happening in an environment. There's a case point of a public sector organisation that got hit with ransomware a couple of years ago. They had early indicators. Their protection suite stopped those early indicators, but actually they then got missed. And so, as to your point, the people who are trying to get into those environments are persistent. They continue to try
something else,
and then they'll ultimately find a way around it. And if we're not paying attention to it, then frankly we find ourselves needing to do that forensic to find out how we can prevent that from happening again.
Absolutely. All right, so I think we've talked about why we actually need to be doing this. So what does logging and monitoring mean? So most, if not all, hardware and software and environments these days produce logs in some form, but a lot of the time we only ever actually see these things when someone asks us to do debugging on a piece of software or something like that. Can you explain a little bit more about what kinds of stuff that logging can actually give us information on?
Yeah, I'll start as a point product piece. If you again think about traditional antivirus or firewalls, what generates an event? An event can be a detection for something that has been blocked. An event can be something as silly as a product update or similar. And so all of those logs have, of course, existed for a very, very long time. But the relevancy of those is actually very, very different to where XDR products stand, for example, and of course where we start to ingest a lot more into SIEM-based products. Early indicators of compromise aren't something has been blocked, it's a weird behavior has happened, somebody's done something slightly different on that machine, it's connected to a bad IP address, all of which a traditional product can protect against if it knows against it. Arguably, next generation AV with machine learning and AI capabilities very much can as well. But no technology is infallible, right? So those events are only relevant.
Exactly, and a lot of these things that get detected could be just normal operation because the people acting behind the scenes are often mimicking what the system services would be doing or indeed what an administrator would be doing.
I think when it comes to what data to actually log and understand and build configurations around and playbooks around, it can be anything. Anything that creates a log incident can be dragged in, can be monitored, and can be put into a playbook. And sometimes that's not as useful because you're getting more and more data from potentially non-infrastructure or non-cybersecurity type products. But on the other hand, it can be very useful. And one use case that we see a lot is something that we've coined kind of the impossible traveler. So somebody walks into a door in your office today and it creates a log. Like on its own, that log is just saying John Smith walked through that door. However, John Smith then signs on in London 2 minutes later. That is an impossible range of movement for them to do. So taking a door log and taking a login log, putting them together, suddenly you've got a very valuable piece of information to say something's not right here and we need to look at this.
And I think that's very much the crux of the why we need to be doing this stuff and what it is all about. It's about looking at these individual benign events that happen or occurrences that taken on their own don't really mean anything, or they could just be perfectly normal operation, but when taken in conjunction with other events, that it then starts to be more compelling that there's something odd or untoward going on here. Well, that kind of brings us to how we actually go about doing the logging and the monitoring. And obviously Sophos and Logpoint have got two very different approaches to this, similar in some aspects, but different in others. And we already touched upon this, that the reason that we need these solutions is because the scale of the information that we're getting from the logs is just overwhelming. It's too much for humans to be able to cope with. I don't know whether you remember, there was an event there was a Sophos event that I was at not long ago, and it was something in the range of, it was billions or trillions of events get generated every hour of every day, and it's just like, and that's, that's across an average environment.
And that's only going to get worse.
Yeah.
There's only one way that's going.
Right. Well, that's
I can speak from a customer I was doing a health check with the other week. They had 900,000 detection entries over a 30-day time period. If all of those were, big red signs, then clearly something would be very, very wrong in their environment. But very much to your point, a lot of that was just traditional event noise that has taken place in their environment. Yeah. So it's an inordinate amount of data.
It's being able to see through that. And so, but part of this is bringing all of this information together in one place. And we've got, there's two different approaches here. So we have XDR, which is extended detection and response, which is the part of the Sophos Intercept X advanced solution. And then we have SIEM, or SIM as you call it. I don't know which way is the right way to pronounce it. And I'm kind of saying it now. I'm not sure whether I'm saying the right thing. But that's very much what the Logpoint solution is all about. If we start with Sophos, first of all, do you mind just giving us a quick overview of what XDR is, what it's about, and how it works?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the market has created this term EDR and XDR. Yeah. And actually, for me, it's an additional tool set. It's additional telemetry points, additional areas that somebody can use to find that needle in the haystack. But if you think about just the EDR from a starting point, endpoint detection and response, we started with taking extra logs on a device, so journals, data recorders that captured information around.
And this is all coming from the antivirus agent that you've got deployed on the endpoint?
Well, for us, it's the same agent, but for some of the other vendors in that space, it just started with a monitor agent, for example. Right, okay. So just taking all of the recorded actions on that device and actually then trying to determine whether they're worthy of being escalated. So I guess just for a bit of explanation as well, the transition from EDR to XDR from a Sophos perspective was that we took the decision that actually we have a lot of different point products.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We've got firewall, we've got email, we've got wireless access points, switches. All of those feed telemetry into our threat analysis center under the same XDR platform. So we call it extended detection and response, because if I'm looking for an IP, a hash, a URL, I can look across the range of my products to see where
multiple different sources.
Exactly, where that indicator of compromise has been raised. I guess the next point from that for us, for XDR, is that we'll take the data, those hundreds of thousands of touch points every single day, and we do some filtering in our data lake. So the idea is that we're going to correlate those events, scrub them with AI workers, if we wanted to call them that, so that we can get contextualized detections to customers that are mapped with a risk score, and more importantly, they've got the context around a MITRE attack framework, what devices were affected, group them all together for a group of investigations, as it were. So the XDR piece for us, again, to my point, is very much in a tool set in addition to the protection Intercept X offers. Definitely doesn't add additional out-of-the-box protection capabilities.
Absolutely, yeah. It's just greater insight into what's going on.
That's it. But the idea is that, coming back to the points around finding the early needle in the haystack, something like the door opening system somewhere in a building, for us that could be somebody's logged in multiple times against a device with one IP address, and the next day it exhibits a different IP, and then from that there's a trail of they ran a PowerShell command that is not normal for them, or they moved laterally over RDP to a different device. Those little breadcrumbs ultimately together would form something that's worth looking at, that would normally be benign, as you described it.
But it's very much, it's very localized to the endpoints and any network peripherals that are dotted around as well.
Absolutely. So for us, outright on the extended detection and response piece, it's Sophos products that are feeding into that and taking telemetry out of it. Roadmap, maybe a little bit later on for the conversation, we're looking to take third-party telemetry. So I guess we start considering the XDR versus SIEM conversation a little bit more. But right now, our threat analysis center brings in anything from a Sophos telemetry touch point, so that if you're a SOC analyst, you're an engineer, you've got one place to go so you can see whether something is good, bad, ugly.
Still heavily dependent on a human. It does some of the work for you, but a human still has to be looking at this stuff really to make it any use.
Absolutely. I think we've got something like 500-600 rules that generate certain aspects to be raised to a detection, but it's down to the end user, the admin, the engineer, the SOC analyst to decide what to do with it. Yeah.
Right. Cool. Thank you. From the Logpoint perspective, it's a much bigger story, isn't it?
Yeah. So SIEM has been around for a long time now. I think probably only antivirus and firewall in the security space were technologies that was around before it. And it very much kind of came into the market as we will integrate with most things, and Logpoint today have near on 1,000 API integrations with all different security and technology solutions, so that we can ingest that information, as well as we can, anything that creates a log, we can also do a script, so we can bring it in another way as well. So we're kind of into the thousands, if you like, of IT tools that we can take logs and integrate into Logpoint. And the whole point of what SIEM's trying to do is, as I mentioned around the impossible traveler use case, is taking different data points from different systems, try and correlate it together and build very specific playbooks around them, so that it can start to create events and alerts for security analysts to follow up on should you see anomalous activity.
But this is from very disparate systems, as opposed to
Correct.
The XDR that we were talking about in the context here is quite sort of blinkered in that it's only what Sophos can actually see through their products, whereas with Logpoint and SIEM solutions, you can pull it from just about anything that generates log files.
Exactly, and we've got a great technical relationship with Sophos, so we can drag in Sophos data as well as some other IT and security data, and we can help cross-correlate against those platforms as well. But what we're talking about now, as well as SIEM, because I mentioned it's been around for a long time and we're not the only people doing this, is we talk about our platform as as converged SIEM now, because SIEM's very much the glue and the cornerstone of that. But on its own, it has its challenges. I think we've just spoken about all these thousands of integrations that we can bring into the data.
But it's absolutely,
so much data.
the same things that Costa alluded to is magnified in the case of a SIEM solution.
Exactly, and there's also potential slight gaps in detection capabilities as well. So what we've added into our platform now, as we call it, the Converged SIEM, is our UEBA capability, so user behavior analysis. So if somebody's just acting in a different way, so they might be on the same IP address, they might be in the same location, but they're accessing a file that they've never accessed before, and they're doing it at 2 o'clock in the morning, and these are a 9 to 5 worker. So it's the same user in the same place, but they're behaving differently. So what UEBA is trying to understand, have those credentials been compromised, and are they being used by someone else, or is insider threat happening? Is it a disgruntled employee that's downloading the database of certain things because he's leaving next week? So UEBA can help with use cases like that, which is slightly out of the functionality of the SIEM. We've also got our business critical security, because what we found is when you go and talk to SAP users or Oracle users or Salesforce users, they're with the application guys, and the application guys don't like to open their tools to the security guys because they think they're going to slow it down in some way, and obviously downtime is a huge problem for those. So what we've done via acquisition is we can now take SAP audit logs in and bring them into a SIM world. So we can do the
Right,
exact
okay.
same capability that we do on standard infrastructure on those business critical solutions now, which is generally where the crown jewels are held anyway, and where these attackers are trying to get to. So if somebody's doing something strange on there, we can now start detecting that as well. And then the final element that brings all this together, which I think is probably one of the most important ones, because we can create as many detection alerts as we want. If you're not doing anything about it, then you may as well not create them in the first place. And that comes to our SOAR solution. So our orchestration, our automation and response capability, where we can start automating, like phishing is something that happens multiple times a day. Ransomware, again, something that happens multiple times a week. All these alerts that are continuously repeating themselves, we can automate a lot of that process, so that the security analysts themselves, rather than having to deal with the thousands of events that potentially SIM's creating, they're now only dealing with a small number, because automation is adding all the relevant information that they can. So when it hits a security analyst desks, they don't need to do as much enrichment or spend as much manual time on that. It's been done for them. So I've spoken a lot about a lot of different products there, but I think this is where SIM's going. SIM's going more into a platform play now that's all encompassing, so that you can not only detect, but you have that full automated response alongside it.
That was a really good summary, thank you. There's a lot of the points that you touched upon there, and before you started talking about UEVA and the SOAR elements, I've spoken to customers dozens of times where they've adopted SIM solutions in the past. And you know, as we were talking about before, it's just become this box that sits in the corner that they invested quite a bit of money in, but they just didn't have the time to look after it. And you know, and there's even with the tools that you've added in there still needs to be hands on keyboard, eyes on glass, someone watching it with both of these solutions. But I think the descriptions that you gave there also made something quite clear that I've thought for quite a while, is that there's value in both of these types of solutions, but the horses for courses phrase always comes to mind, that for organizations that, you know, the things that you were talking about, big scary things like SAP and stuff like that, some organizations will be heavily endemic with that, and they need to be monitoring that stuff. Similarly with like SQL databases or big web apps and stuff like that. And that's where SIM really comes into its own. Whereas a lot of smaller organizations maybe don't have all of that stuff, but they still want to be having that degree of protection that XDR perhaps would offer there. And that's sort of the point that brings me to, kind of in the sort of final throes of this, is around how we can get away from this need for a human to be monitoring this stuff all of the time. Now, Logpoint have taken some quite big strides in doing that with the UEBA and the SOAR, as we sort of discussed. What's Sophos's sort of, you know, which way are they going with this?
A really good question. And back to your point around, you know, stopping humans doing it, as it were. We've got 3.4 million lack of cybersecurity roles that need to be filled, for example.
So it's a constant problem.
So the people don't exist in the first place to manage them. You know, you bring all of this back into one of the main purposes of a SIEM is to gather as much intel and to make it as easy as possible for somebody to find something that is good and bad and do something about it. Likewise, for us, the other side of that play is that for XDR, all the security tooling that we put in there, we would argue that somebody's not looking at it and watering it, as it were, making sure that they're actioning what comes out of it, then it becomes, as you described, that tool in the box that sits in the corner somewhere and doesn't really offer any value. So what we've kind of found that the market play for us now is that cybersecurity as a service seems to be growing. Gartner came out with a figure earlier this year that they expect most organizations, 60%, to go down an MDR type service, managed detection and response service, by 2025. So that's a huge amount of organizations, and Gartner obviously can be taken very seriously with that stat, that basically we're saying we don't have the manpower, we don't have the expertise, we don't have the time and skill to do that. So Sophos's MDR service is fundamentally originally born out of Sophos technologies. So when we went to market back in 2019 with it, it was off Sophos Endpoint, Sophos Firewall. But the way that's evolved for us as our Security Operations Center services, if we were to describe it another way, is that we're trying to be not like a SIEM, but we're trying to be more vendor agnostic.
it's you're moving away. You're broadening the scope of the telemetry that you can ingest, aren't you?
Absolutely. So we now have what we deem as integration packs. So we try and say, bring your own tools to our SOC, as it were. So if you've got a Palo Alto, you've got a Cisco firewall, Meraki, you want to bring those to the SOC. You've got your Duo identity, you've got your Microsoft telemetry. All of those things we will quite happily take into our SOC, but we don't treat that telemetry as a second place citizen, as it were. We're trying to make sure that that telemetry is used in the exact same way as the Sophos telemetry. So it goes through all the same workers, it generates cases, detections, and ultimately investigations that puts it in front of our SOC analysts. So the people part of that process isn't going away for us. We automate an inordinate amount, as you can probably appreciate as well. But for us, the business context and the response action side sits with an analyst for those higher, more targeted and focused response actions.
So I think that also comes back to, I did a little bit of penetration testing in my previous role, but enough to open my eyes to just how little I knew about the, how broad the cybersecurity world actually is, but it opened my eyes to just, on one hand, how easy hacking can be with the right tools, with a system that isn't being maintained and looked after properly. But it's also very much an art form, and it's difficult to replicate that with AI, and that's why we need to have these humans watching it, because I've spoken to lots and lots of different SOC analysts, and people often say you get a feeling about, you see the behaviors, and it could be nothing, but you'll see the same behaviours across the board, and you get a feeling about some of them that looks like there's someone trying to do something there, as opposed to it just being a piece of software doing it.
Absolutely. And we have of course got plenty of detection handling that takes care of by machine learning and AI, if you want to call it that. But then we've got a dedicated adversary pursuit team. So the whole purpose of the SOC is that we're not an alert monitoring system. Okay, yes, we respond to detections and alerts, but the other side of that is that we've got a dedicated team who are going to poke and look for the needle in the haystack, even if there isn't a needle. So they are doing hypothesis-based threat hunting, using that gut feeling, their instinct, what they know, what they've been trained on, how they've been battle hardened, or even it might be about a piece of POC code that they've read about online. They go and see whether any of our 17,000 MDR customers are affected. And if they are, the great thing is we can spin that back into the algorithm, so we can get a detection out of it, so all the customers can benefit from it, from the automated play as opposed to the human play.
So on the AI piece as well, I think what it will become a very strong opinion for SOC members to follow. Like, we're not saying that AI in cybersecurity, with it being such a delicate area of business, there's no way that AI is going to replace people in this. No. It will always need that trust of a person to say, this is good or this is bad, right? But I think AI, as we've seen with ChatGPT and other things, it will become a very strong opinion that you can reference against based on all the data it's reading, and it will just become another tool in the toolbox of these security analysts. But there's always going to need to be people there to make decisions on whether to close or further investigate these cases, which is why we're seeing such an uptake, whether it be with managed services or SOC as a service providers. We're seeing a lot of uptake of people taking on our solution to build services around, because they know that their customers are really struggling with the personnel, whether it be the amount of personnel that they've got or just the level of knowledge that they've got around these subjects, or whether the fact that they need to do 24/7 but they can't. There's a huge upturn in that SOC as a service and MDR.
And just to follow on from that, that's something that we're actually looking at doing ourselves. So that's, we're in the process of getting that set up.
I think it comes back to your point of horses for courses. Every customer's use case is different, right?
Yes.
And I've got plenty of customers where they will have a SIEM solution that is for a very specific purpose for what they want to get out of it, to combine a lot of their telemetry points. But then they also see a value in a dedicated MDR service. And likewise, I've got customers who don't want any managed services from us or MSSPs because they've got a very well-tuned SIEM solution that they continue to invest in.
And that's it. Yeah, I mean, that's something that we probably haven't touched upon, but it's very difficult to get to that point without dedicated personnel who are going to tune it for you continuously, because it's not something you can just do once and then leave. it changes as much as the format of the log files will change.
Yeah, I mean, think about how many new detections get created by Sophos every day, then add how many other security vendors, and that's just the security solutions.
Yeah, that's exactly not mentioning hardware. That's great, and I think we've run out of time on that, guys, but thank you very much. That was a really good discussion. I really enjoyed that. So just to sum up, logging and monitoring is another essential component of any organization's cybersecurity strategy. It depends on how big your organization is as to how far you want to go with this, but it's very much around making sure that you're looking at that telemetry and you're watching for those warning signs, because as we sort of said before, all of these cyber incidents and cyber attacks can be prevented if you see those warning signs and you can actively do something about it. The first way to do it is to get that log information. Then you need to get it into one place, and you use a tool like XDR or a SIM tool to do that. But then you need to be able to monitor that, and that's going to require dedicated personnel in-house, specialists that are doing this. And if you can't do that, then the logical next step is to look at outsourcing that and adopting a managed SOC, or leveraging a managed SOC or a managed SIEM solution alongside threat hunting as well, to give you that complete coverage. That's all for this session. So thanks for watching. Hope you found it informative and you learned something. And I'll see you next time. Stay secure.